Good morning, everyone. Thank you. Good morning again. I'm Orhan. I'm the director of the Atlantic Council Energy and Economic Summit. I met personally many of you in this room, and I hope you enjoyed the first day of our summit. We have another great program today, as you know, which goes all the way into our gala dinner tonight at the Chiran Palace. And we hope to be able to see you in our sessions this morning and this afternoon. And we have the honor to start the day with a great panel with our very distinguished guests. We have a little bit of a time constraint on our morning program, so therefore I'm just going to go right into introducing our panel very briefly and then give the podium to our keynote speaker. At the end of our panel, our distinguished guest, Mr. Christof Rühl, who is the Group Chief Economist and Vice President of BP. Prior to working at BP, he was with the World Bank Group, and he was a professor of economics at the University of California in Los Angeles. Dr. Rühl is a specialist in macroeconomics and energy economics, and he has widely published in these fields. Next to me, as many of you know very well, is Dr. Fatih Birol, who is the Chief Economist of the International Energy Agency based in Paris. He is also the founder and the chair of the IAEA's Energy Business Council. There are so many things that I can tell about Dr. Birol, but for the sake of time, I'm going to skip all of that. Just to mention that he was also appointed the chairman of the World Economic Forum's Energy Advisory Board. We are again honored and privileged to have such a distinguished panel. First thing, the International Energy Agency's small book, if I may call it so, the World Energy Outlook, was published only 2012, only about 4 days ago, on November 12th. Again, we are very lucky to have Dr. Fatih Birol, the chief author of this report, to have with us. So without further ado, Mr. Birol, the podium is yours. And thanks for being here, for both of you.
So, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great pleasure to be here, and I'm very impressed, I should say, with when I look at the program, with the meeting, and how many important players are here in Istanbul. And I am very happy, somebody who loves the city very much. As Mr. Taner mentioned, we just released our flagship publication, World Energy Outlook. There are a couple of messages coming from the book on the efficiency side, on the water, climate change, and the others. But I will skip all of them and focus on one issue today with you, which is the issue of the fact that the foundations of the global energy system are shifting, and shifting in a significant and in a rapid way. And it will affect everybody. Even if you are not a driver of this shift, you will be definitely affected from the consequences of that shift. So I will talk about this very briefly today. What are the drivers of the shift? On the oil and gas side, the unconventional energy, oil and gas boom in United States and Canada, and I will come to that in a minute, as well as the changes happening in Iraq. Why Iraq? Because not only the production is going to grow significantly, but at the same time, Iraq has a different way of running the country, different investment framework compared to some other major producers in the region. Another driver of this change is the very fact that some key countries in the world are changing their plans as far as the nuclear energy is concerned. Germany, Switzerland, Japan, and maybe even France are changing their plans and cutting back their nuclear targets, phasing out nuclear. This would mean that energy, which is supposed to come from nuclear, should come from other energy sources, natural gas, renewables, coal, and others. So this is a second driver. Third, and the not very well known driver, is the one on the energy efficiency. At least 4 major economies recently, within the last 1 year, put legislations on energy efficiency which has major impact, using energy more efficiently. China, in its last 5-year plan, set a very strong target. Europe has a very stringent energy efficiency directive now. United States has fuel efficiency standards put in place, and also Japan has a very important electricity efficiency legislation now. Another point when we look at today is the oil prices. I hear my distinguished colleague, Dr. Rühl, I am sure he's going to talk about the oil markets in depth. Everybody, when we talk about the prices, high prices, remember the $147. It is good from a speculation point of view, but when you look at the average price of the year, 1st of January this year and 1st of November, we hit, on average, the highest oil prices ever in the history. And ladies and gentlemen, this is a significant problem, at least I believe so, for the economic recovery of many parts of the world. But when we look at the gas prices, natural gas prices, I should say, there is a major discrepancy between the gas prices in United States vis-à-vis Europe and Japan. In Europe, we pay up to 5 times higher natural gas prices, and in Japan, up to 8 times higher. This is striking. But what is more striking, I believe, which is very important, only 5 years ago, those prices were in 3 regions almost the same. There was only $1 or $1.50 difference. So Europe, US, and Japan prices are very close to each other. Now, 5 times higher and 8 times higher. And there are many consequences of that, which I will come in a minute. A couple of other issues which I think important. Fossil fuel subsidies are increasing substantially, killing the chances for renewables, killing the efficiency efforts. And this year, we have observed that there was an increase of fossil fuel subsidies, oil, coal, and gas, about 30% increase, mainly coming from the Middle East and North African countries. In the year 2010, we have thought that most of the countries in Middle East and North Africa had plans to phase out the subsidies to improve their economies. But after the Arab Spring, what we see is that subsidies have in fact increased rather than decreasing. Climate change, very worried. Carbon dioxide emissions increased an additional 1 gigaton last year, which made us closer to the point of no return in terms of climate change, and it's a big worry. And at the same time, renewable energies are going very difficult times. Many governments are reviewing their subsidy schemes in terms of renewables, and we may well see more and more pressure on the renewable energies. Now, one point that many of us don't think a lot, and perhaps it's not at the heart of the agenda of many of us, but since we have a lot of colleagues from US, I know that the US Secretary of State is very keen on this issue, namely energy access of the poor. We follow this issue since 10 years. The point is, ladies and gentlemen, 1.3 billion people, about 20% of global population, they have no access to electricity in sub-Saharan Africa, in South Asia, and elsewhere. And this is an economic issue, but maybe beyond that, a moral issue. A final point in the context, issue of water. We need more and more water for energy use, and it is becoming more of a problem in the next years to come as the water resources are scarce and energy needs more water, and as such, availability of water becomes an important criterion when assessing the feasibility of many energy projects. Now let me look at the future, which is the future doesn't bring very good news for the organization I am working for, the International Energy Agency. When we were founded in the 1975, our member countries' share in the global energy use was about 2/3. And now, when we look at the future, it will go down to about down to 1/3. Our member countries, US, Canada, all European countries, Australia, Japan, Korea, and New Zealand. So our role in terms of energy demand is going down, and the role of the emerging countries, especially China, India, and Middle East, is increasing substantially. So this means decisions in terms of energy demand taken in Beijing or New Delhi will affect all of us in terms of energy demand, even though these decisions may be focused on their domestic markets. Through different linkages, it will affect all of us in the next years to come. And the very fact that this slide shows you center of gravity of the energy demand is moving to east, leaving west. Now, in our report, we paid a lot of attention on the US energy picture. US conventional oil production was declining years and years, and as a result of the technological developments that many of you are familiar, we see an increase on the tight oil, and as a result of that, we expect, as you might have heard, the US will be a top oil producer before 2020, around 2017, overtaking Saudi Arabia. Having said that, it should be misunderstood, Saudi Arabia is and will remain the largest oil exporter of the world for several decades to come. But US will be the top producer, and of course, most of this oil, if not all, is going to be used at home in the United States. The second one is on the natural gas front. Conventional gas was declining, and now we expect this as a result of the shale gas revolution. We see a major growth in US gas, and as a result of that, very soon, in 5-6 years of time, we should see US is exporting gas. So these changes happening in the United States has implications for entire energy markets in terms of the trade, in terms of prices, including the domestic prices, and in terms of geopolitics. I would like to talk a few words on the Middle East and the changing a bit the geopolitics of the energy picture. First of all, United States, let me start with this, US oil imports in general are declining, and especially from Middle East. Looking at the distance, we expect that the US oil imports from Middle East, which was a significant chunk a few years ago, will go down almost to zero. So very soon, US may not need to import any oil from Middle East. This is definitely something to take note of. But something I think even more important, because we are perhaps focused too much on the developments in the US and don't look at the consequences of that. One consequence is that Middle East oil, only a few years ago, about 50% was going to East, namely Asia, and 50% to West. What we expect is that in the next 2 decades, about 90% of the Middle East oil will go to Asia. 90%. It means almost everything. So therefore, there is a new trade axis being built between the Middle East, the Gulf region, and the Asia, Beijing, New Delhi, and Seoul, and others. So this is something definitely one, I believe, there are many colleagues who know the foreign affairs issue much better than me, but I believe these may well have consequences for the foreign policy making. Now, one word on Iraq. I mentioned the foundations of the global energy system is shifting. What is happening in the US and Canada is important, definitely a determining factor, but Iraq is also very important. We made a special report on Iraq this year, and I had the pleasure to present it in Turkey again with the Atlantic Council. Iraq production is set to double from 3 to 6 within 10 years of time, and grow further to 8 million barrels per day. I know that there are many colleagues from the Foreign Office, Foreign Services here, many distinguished ambassadors. If you want to take one number at home, there are so many numbers I am saying, the number I would suggest you is the following. According to our analysis, projections, and I should say that our projections for Iraqi growth is much more modest than the Iraqi government's projections, I should make that. The number that I suggest you to keep in mind is that we expect about 45% of the growth in the global oil production will come from Iraq, and the rest from all other countries put together. So almost every second barrel coming to oil markets, global oil markets, the first one will come from Iraq, and the rest from the other countries. And Iraq is also providing a lot of oil to Asia in the future. And China is a very important destination. About 2 million barrels per day to go to China. And there will be another way around. When I say the Iraqi production growing that much, 30% of that growth in Iraqi oil production will come from the fields which are either directly owned by the Chinese companies or co-owned, involved by the Chinese companies. So this is also something that we have to keep in mind, which I call a new trade access, B2B, Baghdad to Beijing. Both ways oil is going and the investments coming. It's not only oil sector, but also the other parts of the infrastructure development. Now, natural gas. What is happening in the shale gas business is definitely changing the world. US, Canada, Australia, let's don't forget Australia, catching up Qatar very soon as one of the largest LNG exporters of the world. And yet to come, China. Please don't forget this, what I'm suggesting you to remember. China may well make a major surprise in terms of the shale gas production very soon. Huge efforts are going. And this changes in the shale gas changing the world, as we have predicted 4 years ago in the World Energy Outlook. At that time I said, again in Istanbul, a silent revolution is taking place in the United States, and now it became very loud and going everywhere. So this is currently the trade picture. As a result of these developments, trade is becoming much more widespread, and this has major implications, mainly for the traditional exporters. Traditional exporters are losing from volumes they are exporting, and also their pricing regime will be more and more under pressure. The gas importers have more chances now to discuss, negotiate with the traditional gas exporters to have better prices. United States gave a major gift to the gas importers in Europe to make their hands stronger. I am not sure that this was a deliberate gift, but at the end of the day, it was a gift given to Europeans to discuss, to make their hands strong vis-à-vis the major gas exporters. So I am coming to the end of my words, and one word on energy security, which is, as we know, very closely linked with the national security, with economy, and the vulnerability of the economies. And there is again a sign of a shift here. When you look at the major economies in the world, their energy security and their energy imports are huge. And for example, China here today imports 15% of its gas needs, and about half of it is oil import needs. And for China, it's a major concern. Major concern. And when we look at the future, all of these regions, oil and gas imports are increasing substantially, with major implications on the vulnerability of their economies, on their foreign policy positioning, and other things. And this is not the only thing. The surprising thing is the United States, while everybody's oil and gas imports are increasing, except for Japan, because it cannot increase more than 100%, the United States goes to a completely other direction. In the United States, we see that as I said, US is going to export gas, and the oil imports go to very low levels. But I would like to mention you one thing. After we published our report, we had a huge, beyond our expectation, media coverage, the US becoming self-sufficient and so on, but they miss a point, and this is very important, and I wanted to, even though it may sound a bit technical, I wanted to share this with you. It's not technical, it is something that what the first Obama administration did, and many people don't know, perhaps they themselves as well. Now, the success story about the lessening oil import dependency or self-sufficiency has not one but two factors behind that. The first factor is, as everybody knows, as I try to say, the increase in the oil production. This is very well established, and I think everybody knows our numbers are here. But there is a second one, ladies and gentlemen, I would very much like you to bring to your attention, namely, as a result of the recent fuel efficiency standards, so-called the CAFE standards, strengthening of that the Obama administration, the first administration, put in place, there is also a strong downward pressure on the domestic oil use in the US. So it means US will not only produce more oil, but consume less oil at home, because cars are becoming more efficient, need less oil to to drive the same amount of kilometer. So there are two factors here: more oil production and less oil consumption at home, and the combination of these two brings you to a self-sufficiency. Therefore, this is, I think, an example for many countries around the world, pushing the energy efficiency button in addition to increase the domestic production levels. So, one final slide, and I am finishing here. What does this all mean? We talk about the gas, oil markets. There are at least two implications on that. One is the geopolitical implication. I will leave to you, I put a couple of dots there. But the other one is on the economics and competitive economics of different countries. This is the electricity prices in the future under this vision. How do they go? What you see here is that, for example, in the case of Europe, European electricity prices will be about 50% higher than the US electricity prices and almost 3 times higher than the Chinese electricity prices. And this is huge. Anybody, I don't know if we have colleagues or manufacturers here, will tell you that this is a major issue for them. And the reason why in Europe we pay so much for electricity prices, there are a couple of reasons there. First of all, in Europe, we use gas, very expensive compared to US and China. Oil indexed gas pricing is very, very expensive. In Europe, we have subsidies on renewables, which comes on top of that. In Europe, we have a CO2 price, carbon price, where the other parts of the world do not have. And in Europe, some of the countries made a decision to phase out nuclear power, running nuclear power plants, which were producing electricity at low cost. And as a result of that, European electricity price will be very high. Bad news for Europeans and good news for Americans and the Chinese. At least for 2 reasons. One, in Europe, it will be the manufacturing industry which should suffer because of the competitiveness issue vis-à-vis the other countries. One of the major input, especially for the heavy energy industries, they will use much more expensive energy to produce the same good, and it will be more and more difficult to compete with the American and the Chinese companies. And the second one is for the citizens. Their purchasing power will be negatively affected when you compare the citizens of the United States and Chinese. So from that angle, I believe this picture, plus the picture I told you about the natural gas prices, also very different. This will have major consequences for the US economy in a positive sense, and it will be a major challenge for the European economy. So let me just put my thoughts together. Policymakers, we have a lot of distinguished ministers, prime ministers here, will face tough choices in terms of energy policies, especially in the next few years. Because some of the decisions they may make on energy may well have negative consequences for economy. And for me, for example, phasing out of nuclear power is one of them, for my own personal view. Or some decisions they take on the environment may well have implications for the economic performance of those countries. So it is very important in the governments that there is a consistency of those policies are crucial, not only look at one issue, one topic, but the general implications of that. The changes in the global energy system is important. Foundations are shifting rapidly, and this will have implications for the economic positioning of different countries and also their geopolitical situation. Iraq is set to play a crucial role. South of Iraq, central Iraq, north of Iraq, they are all very important. And I think the production growth will come from that entire country, will have implications for the global oil and gas system. I didn't talk about climate change today, and it is a pity we didn't have much time, but the later we move on climate change, the more costly it will be to fix the problem. The more costly it will be, the more difficult it will be to have an agreement, the burden sharing among the countries. So therefore, we may well be too late already to make the necessary steps in that direction. And finally, I didn't talk much, but a major part of our work goes to energy efficiency. And we already saw a revolution on the unconventional energy in terms of oil and gas in the last few years, and it's continuing. And our very hope that we see another unconventional energy revolution on the energy efficiency side very soon, including in my country, Turkey. Thank you very much for your attention.
Before I want to turn the podium over to Dr. Rühl, I just want to tell you a little story about the background of today's meeting. When Fatih and I discussed about the timing of this panel, I insisted that we should have it during breakfast because I know that he always makes some eye-opening remarks. And by looking at the audience, I saw that a lot of eyes opened up right at breakfast, so thank you for that as well. Dr. Rühl?
Good morning to all of you. Thank you very much for the invitation and for the opportunity to do this difficult job. First of all, I think congratulations are in order. We all use the World Energy Outlook. We all appreciate it. It's transparent, it's well-founded, and most importantly to me, it helps all of us to lift the debate on energy on a slightly higher level, and most of us will agree that this is badly needed. The attendance today confirms that you and your team have done that again. The interest is large. People are willing to take on these issues. And for that, I think it's not only congratulations, but you really deserve a big thank you from all of us in the industry. Secondly, it's a very tough job to comment on this thing. It's not only that it's very big and very substantial, it is also a particular setup. So how does one normally approach a comment on projections? One could say, okay, I compare it with other projections and then nitpick around where differences are and so on. This is not possible because the International Energy Agency is quite explicit that this is not a forecast, but rather an exploration of different various policy scenarios. And so comparing it with other forecasts like ours so would make little sense. All we would discover is that both are wrong, but for very different reasons. The second approach is one could pick numbers and disagree on them, but this is a big tome of a work, and so we would still be here tomorrow. It's also not very useful. So when I was thinking about it, what I decided to do was to concentrate on two areas, or on the overlap of two areas. I want to concentrate on a few examples where the World Energy Outlook actually postulates a change in historic energy trends. So where it says history was different from where we will be going. And I want to throw some light on these areas by looking at the scenario approach, by asking how would the insights gained from the World Energy Outlook possibly change if I'm allowed to deviate from the underlying policy assumptions which determine much of the results in the World Energy Outlooks. By giving you an example, hopefully this will become clearer. The first such topic is energy efficiency or energy intensity. Here I have no quarrels in translating energy efficiency into energy intensity, which, for those who don't know, is a measure which is the broadest possible efficiency measure, really, which is the amount of energy one needs to produce 1 unit of GDP. That, I think, is a useful measure. And here, the WEO postulates a change in trends from a deceleration of improvements in energy intensity to an acceleration. Right? Now, I have no quarrels with that result, but I think it misses a bit of an opportunity. In the WEO, this is the outcome of policies and of regulation. In fact, I think in history, the single most important driver of improvements in energy intensity over the long term have perhaps been structural shifts in the economy. There is this well-known picture that energy intensity across all the countries we know, with the exception of the Middle East, and also for the world as a whole, first rises, then peaks, and then falls. And that this rise and peak and fall coincides with the normal pattern of economic development. As people move from low energy efficient agriculture into from low energy intensive agriculture into high energy intensive industry, energy intensity rises pretty steeply. And then as people and production move from industry into lower energy intensive services, it starts to decline gently. There are insights to be gained from this historic approach. One of them is that we are actually, for the world as a whole, are having the lowest energy intensity levels or the highest energy efficiency in the world since about 100 years. Another one is that we have observed a very rapid process of conversion, where the differences across countries increasingly disappear, and countries become more and more similar in the age of globalization. The differences between countries in energy intensity today are the lowest since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution in Great Britain. Why does this matter? I think it matters because it would indicate a certain degree of caution as to the speed with which energy intensity is likely to proceed in the future. And the speed which is postulated in the WEO is quite high compared to what others say. And so here I think a view at history would add a grain of salt and of caution to this projection. A second point I would raise is energy efficiency. There is a whole section on this important topic which outlines efficiency gains which are possible and, it is said, are all economically viable. This reminded me of a bad joke among economists, which comes from the University of Chicago, where you have the situation where a student comes to his course with a big smile on his face. And the professor, has to be an economics professor, asks him, so what are you smiling about? And the student says, I'm smiling because I find $5 on the sidewalk on the way to school. And the professor says, that's not possible. And the student says, what do you mean it's not possible? It just happened to me. And the professor says this famous saying, there are no $5 bills on the sidewalk, because if they were, somebody would have picked them up. And like all bad jokes, to me this has a kernel of truth. And that kernel of truth in the energy efficient scenario is, if it is so easy and if these options, which are again all derived in terms of regulation and changed policies, if these options are economically sound and beneficial, why hasn't it happened a long time ago? In that respect, there's always, when one wants policy changes, and all of us want to have better energy efficiency, there is always the possibility of pointing at the carrot, which is done here, or exploring why it didn't work. And in that sense, I would have wished myself a bit more of the exploration of why it hasn't happened and where the obstacles are, rather than just the postulates that it can be done and that actually would be quite easy. A third example is the rapid growth of renewables, which is projected in the report, where we have a growth contribution of commercial renewables, so without the biomass which the IEA includes, which goes up from 3.5% between 2010 and 2010 to about 20% for the next few years. And it is, as the WO is quite openly about, it is all subsidized. In fact, there are huge subsidies postulated to keep this going. I think it's about $288 billion. Now, if one wants to look at renewables, and the experience so far, one has to look at Europe. That's where they have been around the longest and where their share is highest. What happens in Europe, also observed in the report, is that in country after country now we are seeing subsidies being cut. Not because people don't like renewables anymore, but because they became too expensive. There's a very simple rule of thumb. If the rate of expansion of subsidized fuels, such as renewables, is faster than its productivity gains, then the amount of subsidies has to increase to sustain that expansion. And so in a very real way, in the region where they are most advanced, they became to some extent a victim of their own success, where governments surprisingly cut down subsidies because they couldn't afford it anymore. And yet, if one translates the underlying assumptions in the World Economic Outlook, it comes to an increase, an annual increase of subsidies in real terms of 4.3% every year until 2035 in real terms. That is higher than the underlying rate of GDP growth. And I, for once, had my doubts that this can be sustained. And again, I think we all want more renewables, but one probably has to be realistic and emphasize that the goodwill of governments, again, the rules of the policy scenario are not enough to accomplish this. One needs more competition. One needs to unleash their innovation potential in a better way, and one needs a change in relative prices through carbon prices to accomplish that, I think. And then fourth, and the last point I wanted to raise is on the underlying prices, in particular, as you guessed rightly, on oil prices. Again, here, the World Economic Outlook postulates a change in historic trends by having very high, very aggressive oil price assumptions. In nominal terms, I think $215 in the new policy scenario, $250 in the current policy scenario by 2035. Now that would put us certainly into new territory. And it raises the specter of two big changes in the system. One on the demand side, where the report postulates ongoing subsidies for fossil fuels, which are high to an extent which I cannot actually, which I don't find in the data. But it's quite likely that with oil prices like that, demand reacts more flexible than is assumed there. And the other and more interesting aspect would be potentially on the supply side. Because with these assumptions of very high oil prices and at the same time very rapid supply growth in North America, but also in places like Iraq, the question is, what happens if we enter a period of lower oil prices? That would potentially change all sorts of things. Among other things, it would have an impact on the rate of growth of unconventional oil supplies in the US and elsewhere. So these are some of the sort of fault lines where I think the scenario approach derived from what is possible in terms of policies collides a little bit from a perspective which would come from more history and more economics in it. And overall, then, this leads to conclusions like that the scenario which has the higher prices has actually the lower efficiency improvements, and the one which has the lower prices has higher efficiency improvements. And in that respect, I think one of the big services that report does is that it enables us to have this kind of discussion. And in that respect, I think the most productive parts of the report, in a real sense, are where it is controversial to these real-world observations. And I hope that we can have that discussion in that spirit. Just one last remark, because you mentioned it explicitly. The story about oil and energy efficiency, where it really puzzled me was in the assumptions about the Middle East. The Middle East is different from other regions. It was the only region in the world where energy intensity continued to increase, not to improve. Energy there is oil and gas, basically. The WA postulates that within the next 10 years, that increase turns into a decline and a rapid improvement in efficiency. And that's another of these points where I'm not sure where it comes from, but I think it's probably a good way to start to connect back to your oil market outlook. All in all, a tremendous piece of work. I'm really grateful that we have it every year. And don't take these things in the wrong way. I agree with almost all the big picture outlines. And what I have here are just matters of perspective rather than detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rühl. We have probably about another 15 minutes left. I'm sure there are a lot of questions from the floor for both Dr. Birol and Dr. Rühl, but in terms of also a programming note, we are again privileged to have Dr. Birol later on today on a different panel on unconventional gas. So leaving those issues to that particular panel, I just want to ask you very quickly, obviously the energy efficiency seems to be a very important topic. And in your report, you are talking about 6 principles. Your reaction to Dr. Rühl's remarks, and if you could elaborate on that, and then we will take some questions from the floor. Thank you.
Now, energy efficiency is a very important fuel, in fact. It is a fuel such as oil, gas, electricity, and others, but we do not use it. Our analysis show that we only use today about 1/3 of the economically available energy efficiency potential. And I say economically available. Why energy efficiency is a problem? The problem is the following. I explain very simply. You are going to buy a car. You go to the car gallery. There are 2 cars there. One of them is $10. The other one is $8. $10 one is more energy efficient. Exactly 2 cars, more energy efficient, but $2 more expensive. So what do? You normally go and buy the $8 car. This is the same thing for the refrigerators, same thing for the factories, this is the same thing for the buildings and so on. There should be a mechanism in order to provide the person who goes to the auto gallery to buy the $10 car, to make him or her understand that this $2 difference will pay back in a few years of time. And our analysis showed that we can improve our energy efficiency, how we use energy, at least 60% by making the right choices. Governments need to provide incentives in order to help the decision makers, the consumers, to go and buy the more expensive in the beginning, but more efficient infrastructure, equipments, which will pay back. And this needs a major organization of the governments, energy ministries, finance ministries, construction ministries, and all of them come together. This is a very complex issue, much more complex than the conventional energy sources and so on, but this can be done. And we have provided a roadmap of that. And energy efficiency is also very crucial, not only making money and bringing economic benefits, but addressing the climate change. Climate change is, unfortunately, I should say, sliding down in the international policy agenda, and it is, I believe, it is our role, including the oil companies, to bring it up, because it is the rich and poor, south and north, it is everybody's problem. It's a major challenge for all of us. And energy efficiency is definitely a tool to address climate change, in addition to bringing economic gains, improving energy security.
Thank you. I'm just going to go directly to the floor because I already see hands coming up. I mean, we have about like 6 or 7 minutes left. So I believe that we have a question at that table. If I can get a microphone there, please. It's coming.
Well, it was extremely interesting. Thank you. It was very clear that this independence of the United States concerning energy makes it stronger, more competitive. But we, abroad, in Europe, in Middle East, ask ourselves, what does it mean concerning the engagement of the United States in the Middle East and abroad? I'm not talking about neo-isolationism. There are other subjects, Israel, Iran, proliferation. But even a gradual retreat of the US, because it's not necessary anymore to engage as they used to be, because they are energy independent, would mean a lot. So do you have any comments about what this means in foreign policy terms for the whole world, this new energy independence and strength of the United States?
I think this is a very well justified question, but I am an expert on 2 things. One is energy. The other one is football, so nothing to do with the other thing. It is beyond my professional mandate, but what I can tell you is that looking at those trends, there may be a need for a different look from the US side on the US engagement in that region from economic incentives point of view, because there's an important change there as the oil imports will be coming mainly, very little terms, and mainly from Canada, Mexico, and Brazil in the future. But it is, of course, economic incentives are not the only driver that for the US engagement, as far as I know, in Middle East, but there are much more authoritative colleagues here who know these things much better than me.
Dr. Rühl, 1 or 2 sentences, because I see other hands coming up too.
It's about the same. I'm not as good in football expertise, probably, but I would say that much at least. It certainly could mean that the ground on which energy policies have been based is shifting. And personally, I have no problem envisaging a Mr. or Mrs. US President, say, in 2030, who looks at some problem in the Middle East and says, well, no skin of my nose. I only need very little oil to import, if any, and that I can get from Canada or Mexico. And we all know markets and politics and nature don't like vacuums. So something has to fill the gap, and I think you can see on Fatih's graphs that as the US becomes less import dependent, other countries become more import dependent, and that's where I stop and where speculation starts, because we don't know.
Okay, let's take a final question, then we have to go. But any other questions from the floor? I guess not. And in that case, I'm going to ask each panelist to please make your closing remarks, if there are any. Dr. Rühl, we'll start with you.
No, in a nutshell, again, I reiterate the thanks we have in this community to this service. And I also like to reiterate, to encourage maybe a world in which it is possible to go more towards a most likely scenario and take account some of these historic economic factors, and less being dependent on basic policy assumptions, which we all know change over time. But that's such a methodological criticism that it is almost not touching the publication.
Thank you very much. Dr. Birol?
So first, one line only. Only one line, and nothing to do with oil and gas. I talk enough about oil and gas, and I'm sure you will talk about oil and gas today and yesterday. It is about climate change. I'm sorry to mention that. Now, recently, when I look at the political picture, recently Atlantic has been widening. And I hope with the elections in both sides of the Atlantic, with the new picture, I think I hope Atlantic can be narrowed down a bit, and the joint efforts to address the climate change in both sides of the Atlantic can be a cornerstone of this new look at the Atlantic, both from the America's side and from the European side. This is what I expect from the leaders in Washington and in Europe. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to thank both of our speakers, not only for their wonderful remarks and for being here with us, but also sticking to the time. That helped a lot. Our next session starts at 9 o'clock, and we will see you throughout the day. Thanks a lot.